to give the unknown instructors what they undertook to do, brought to pass, all things would do on the blade of grass. Huh. Right? Time, are the necessities of spontaneous construction. How is the scene? The scene. How I'm just taking my time to monopolize the stage. Fantasy of winter stew, winter stew of beets, beef and root vegetables. The fantasy of our sensation of hot and cold. Captions here, experiencing technical difficulties we are. Technical challenge. Hey, that's an important theme and a possible subject to be woven in, actually. And the memory will have to hold, you know what I mean? And how could you? You cannot hear. If this was a silent movie, I would say anything I wanted to say, only with florid and dramatic gestures in the finest of cosmetic. Or could you say cosmic metric or cosmetric? Well, I'm writing and talking at the same time. I'm only saying something different from what I'm writing. Now I'm writing and reading at the same time as speaking and writing. Is a simulacra of one. Seen enter a new category, the enjoyment of literature. But as it is, I understand like reaching into a bag for things. You know, this is the test of how good I look, the sound. Right? But it would seem the thought going to a cave. And how would a cave appear for somebody the cave appears in these talks? All right, yes, I have to bring into the, you know, where in the element of the cave, where in the element of the equation am I to be bringing these perceptions of, you know, Aristotelian nearness is the, you know, as the colossal quadrilateral triangle of every fixed intention in the diagonal basis of I'm imagine free to live in such a place where the milk of strange intentions sets upon your sated savage browed feet like a bird of prey whose beak is shaped as that of a canoe. Or maybe, oh, to fall and gather a new plumb line, hook, line, and sinker. Mark Twain, before it was even anyone's alias.
We have good sound.
All right.
So I'm going to remove the placard.
All right.
Hold on now.
All right.
We'll do that. There you are live.
All right.
So ask the folks to send a comment in the comment stream and tell us if they hear you okay.
The content of it has now become, hallelujah, it would seem. If you have audio now, if you can hear this speech of words, indicate to Eric by sending him a signal upon the video streamer or whatever, if I'm using the terminology right, and who knows, I mean, I'm here to misplace all kinds of terminologies. But if we're coming through, if we are coming through, Eric will give me a thumbs up, but what's really beginning to happen is for me. The challenge now takes a certain turn.
Okay, you're good.
All right. All right.
Hey,
Oh, people. All right. Everything is as it should be. And even if it were not, we would still be here doing what we do. Because after all, we got to do something. Anyway, so now, yes, I have to speak. Oh, you should have heard what I was saying when the audio was off. But now I've got to tie it together into a common theme and a common thread. Oh, it's always such a challenge. Oh, it's always such a chasm. Oh, it's always such a chasm in the mountain. Oh, it's such a cave. For I guess it is with the image of the cave that we could now commence. The image of the cave and our pathway toward it, and what we seek for, and what we find inside of it, and its meaning in our minds and in our conception of ourselves. There is the cave, and it has it connotes almost immediately a place of shelter and of closeness to the earth and going to ground, so to speak. It denotes also a sense of the complexity of the coziness of the Cro-Magnon. Yes, of the cave dweller, the primeval cave dweller, whom Anthropos acknowledges in all the glory of that science so artfully conveyed, that the Cro-Magnon, the interior dimensions of the Cro-Magnon's physical capacities were every bit like unto ours in terms of the ability of speech, consciousness, depiction. Oh, something then, oh, so familiar if not identical. And correct me here if I'm wrong, my scientific terminology would be, poetically exact, or you could say in the people's key, in the people's key of approximate. But nevertheless, we know of the similarities of the Cro-Magnon, but go before that to the Neanderthal, because yes, sometimes they were contemporary, the Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthal, and still they expressed the awareness of a non-corporeal aspect of existence. And it is that most primordial gesture, out of that most primordial gesture of, okay, let me specify it just a little bit more, of a belief, well, a belief or a vision, or a trust or a hope or a faith. All of this is possible when you see what their hands did. The first art is the scrapings, the concave scrapings on the underside of the rock of a burial tomb. Concave scrapings made by the hand of the Neanderthals. This is the first art. This is the first abstract tract. This is the first expression of consciousness. This is the first, well, I can say the first, but there were ones before that. No, let's just say that out of the writings of R.G. Levy, I am struck by, again and again, how she takes as points of exploration these primordial religious conceptions and puts them together with each other from the standpoint of her extensive archaeological background, and puts them together, though, with the awareness in her consciousness of the essential nature. I mean, what I'm saying is, it's the rigor of the Aristotelian approach to experimental data, of course, but that is one layer, and that is only one layer that is a static layer, you could say, but at the same time, the insight derived from that form of inquiry contributes every bit as much as anything more or less wild, right? So, lest I go off on too much of a tangent about that. Still, it is in the interpretations of these things. Let me give you an example. Okay, what I want to say is, in general terms, just to start off, I want to say two general things. The notion of classic, especially a classic work of literature, classic, and then the other thing is, has to do with the vision of life that is contained within the work. As we grow in our own spiraling labyrinth, sometimes maze, other times pathway, in the study of literature, we are moved in ourselves in unique ways. And I tell you this, every reader who reads with a sense of what it is in there that really moves them is on the path of using their own human discernment, of seeking out as lodestones or guiding stars or lodestars the classics, their own classics. One would seek out the things that speak to them, so that one would just become part of what you navigate by in the sky. Or it might lead to a different way of understanding the reflections in the puddles by the side of the road left by the rain. All of these things can be expressed within the inner energy of the word. But it takes two. It takes the inspired creator of the literature, and it takes the inspired reader of the literature. What makes inspiration in a writer? You could talk about it forever if you wanted to. It's a mystery. Let's just put it there for a while. But what else is a mystery in the consciousness of the inspired reader? What's a mystery there, and just as spontaneous, is the intuitive keening, the intuitive kenning, the knowledge. It's like a more archaic form of the word knowledge, a more archaic form of understanding where something leaps the barrier, so to speak, leaps the barrier and moves you in this unexpected way, and you'll never know why. It is almost as if it opens up a world where you can be in the consciousness of the way that it has moved you. This is one way of describing it, It goes on, doesn't it now? The uniqueness. Because you yourself have your own way of describing it to yourself. And so so in that light, everything that I'm saying here could be a misdirection. A misdirection. But that's part of it too. Because I'm talking about labyrinths, I'm talking about paths, I'm talking about mazes, I'm talking about footsteps, I'm talking about particles along the wavelengths of wholeness, and the particles of our steps toward that, the limitations of our human intelligence in the midst of the encompassing intelligence of the natural universe around us. And so in between there are many steps, directions and misdirections. I would paraphrase Heraclitus with his idea, his kenning, his intuitive insight, that expressed as a paradox, that the way up is the way down. The way up is the way down. Remember that next time you are on a spiral staircase. You may meet a traveler on that spiral staircase, and they may be carrying a lantern, and yet they may be hooded, and yet they may be cloaked, and yet they may be concealed. The lantern itself is only partially seen, but the light that it casts upon the stairs as the traveler moves leaves one thing that you just don't know. Is the traveler on the spiral staircase going up, or is the traveler on the spiral staircase going down? It's impossible to say. Anyway, so it's a vision of life conveyed in seemingly unexpected ways that Rachel Gertrude Levy communicates to us down through the ages. All right, so let's let her speak to us through the energy of the word coming off of the page. Remembering also, this is an example of a classic being brought to a point where I can begin to tell you of the world, that it makes possible in me, out of which comes these ideas and these words. So, what other time machine can there be but that? I would hardly call it that. But here's what she says. The following pages, however, were not undertaken to prove a theory, but developed under the stimulus of a continual surprise. They deal with the survival of a body of related ceremonial customs, which seem, however greatly their significance may have deepened and widened in the early civilizations upon which our own is founded, to have their sources at the very beginnings of discernible human institutions. There they appear, not as haphazard or isolated phenomena, but already organized into a coherent discipline which may even merit the name of a religion. Okay, a chunk of prose, right? And it comes at you, and it suddenly, I approach it, and it's like I am on the banks of a river, and the river is my own kind of flowing stream of attention. And at the same time, I'm looking up as I guide my craft, and I see, the cliffside and the striations and the layers and all the indications of that. And yet, a rock tumbles down and the entire hillside is changed. Or yet maybe a pelican or a mockingbird or a cowbird comes to land upon some outcropping and the entire picture is changed. How the news gets put down. A paragraph of prose can suddenly, sometimes in an instant of consciousness, present itself to you in the same way. And then what do you do? Oh, well, you have to have the language to say it. The language that you have to say it has to appear in your mind. And it is given to you by your mother, the language of the paragraph upon the page that you read. So, undertaken not to prove a theory, but developed under the stimulus of a continual surprise. See, that's what that's a statement of. developed under the stimulus of a continual surprise. This is how this archaeological book, describing the discoveries found in archaeological diggings in prehistoric ruins in places like Iraq and Palestine in the 1930s. This is where R.G. Levy was as an archaeologist with the University of London. Beginning, I am sure, and seeing with her own eyes the things that were being excavated, which for her, you understand, they are not so much excavations as revelations. And she's beginning to see these things, and one can only imagine how it begins its nascence in her mind. Because then, there's another excursion. There's another trip to Brittany, those dolmens, those stone structures, prehistoric Brittany, and also down there in southwest France, near a part of the Pyrenees I have never been, but down under the ground where I have only hardly been, in those caves down there. I haven't been in those, of course. I've been in caves of my own. No, actually, the caves of the cave paintings. She saw some of those things reflected on them more than the life energies of animals she saw depicted on the cave walls, more than the life energies of the animals, more than a sense of the creative joy of a human hand out of the materials of the earth and its own technique creates an image of that which gives it life and by whose life it lives, right? The buffalo, the hunted animals, the gazelles, the stags, the creatures, and also the people, and the hand drawings, and all of these cave paintings deep within the earth, in inaccessible places. Never have I heard more, succinctly evoked the mystery of the awe and the wonder of the inaccessibility of those paintings, those artworks in those caves. I mean, how both utilitarian can you get keeping them down there under the earth where they can lay unknown for eons and then be rediscovered by those who have no other idea of what their inner consciousness was like than what suddenly opens up to them as they tread upon the ground and go into these chasms in the mountain, into these caves. And there they discover these mysteries done in the deep, dark womb of Mother Earth. And these things are wondrous, and her response to these wondrous signs is this work of art here, this book called The Gate of Horn. It links these primordial conscious expressions into a further odyssey of a further unfoldment of their meaning in ways that relates to our own conception of the paths of our individual and communal lives in such a way that it becomes it's a source of richness for us to contemplate as we go along, if we wish to. May offer a certain proof. Okay, I want to say one more thing, the second paragraph. Let's see if we can track it, if I can track it, in my mind as I'm reading and thinking at the same time, which is my own kind of cave, okay? No line of research into the distribution through time and space of individual rites or objects of cult, which may seem to bear a relation to the earliest known ceremonies, can offer certain proof of development from a common source. But the weight of the whole body of evidence accumulated here is offered as the expression of a living unity of belief and practice, which underlies the religious, artistic, and social development of the ancient world before the revolutions of the Iron Age. So no certain proof is offered. Remember, she's not expressing a theory necessarily. It's more like a patterned gathering is what we're talking about here. And it's still uncertain, but it's offered as an expression of a living unity of belief and practice. As the expression. She is offering this material, this interpreted material, interpreted in words of writing upon a page, as an expression of a living unity of belief and practice. So, I am led to the belief that this very book, as a work of art, is of the same tradition as the cave paintings, the same tradition of expression, simple conceptual expression of a human consciousness, which is made valid by what? Interest. Interest, that's the source of sincerity. Simple interest, not so much a matter of the grandiose wildness, of some earth-shaking proclamation which will transfigure, our bewildered world. Nothing like that. No. Tracing a design that is discerned as she goes along in the understanding and the contemplation of the material before her. That's basically what we're talking about. But in the end, there's always that suggestion of a certain kind of like unifying vision of it all. And that too then is how this writer conceives a unique vision. This is how another way that the book could be considered a classic. This is how this writer, R.G. Levy, gives us a unique vision, because at certain points, after the meticulous exposition of certain things, and then a symbol or an image is brought in, and then in some way, not in any obvious way, but the next exposition of the next image embodies this connection, a connection in a fluidity of meaning, so that an intuitive arrangement of an expression of consciousness is made in the mind, so that with the simple result that what you read about the Stone Age, you suddenly see part of yourself in that very expression. And that's pretty good. That's pretty edifying, I would say. That's a pretty good way that something could be a classic, in a miraculously kind of didactical sense. The Gate of Horn by R.G. Levy. Now, I want to say I only said her name out loud, about 2.5 hours ago, 3 hours ago maybe. Before that, it existed in my mind, and only in my mind, existing as thinking and writing and kind of held back as pondering, and only did it come to the gates of my mouth when it wanted to. And I found that I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it in a way that sounds that good. But that's my own self-consciousness, You probably would have to have an English accent to say it the way it is correct. But we're not after that kind of expression here. So we just, Instead, it's offered in this way. As a communion of a certain kind of thought, and also as an expression, yes, as an expression of personality, because we do. It is possible, as one learns how to appreciate one's self-discovered classics, it is possible to have the fantasy at least, but a transparent fantasy. In other words, a fantasy that is known as such, but only so far to bring us to the brink of a myth. Because after all, what is personality but a myth? So a feeling of the myth, as she studies these myths, one gets a feeling of the myth of the personality herself, her authorial personality, which is as if someone were in a cave with you and you looked at an inscription on the wall and you both noticed some feature, maybe like that hoof mark of red ochre on the cave wall is painted over an indentation in the earth, which is its canvas, in the exact same place on the hoof of a slightly different antlered creature a little bit further back there in another part of the cave. And you both notice this at the same time, and you simply raise an eyebrow to each other. It's that kind of canniness and that kind of intelligence which appears off of these pages. A personality which offers itself not as a depiction of itself for you to be impressed by or not, but more like an actual living offering of a way of seeing, of a vision of life. So that is a way that some kind of warmth comes out of this, which enables a restless intellect such as my own to be able to trace and track what's really going on here. So that's something to be said. So we have a sense then of gratitude to the unknown instructors. Not only R.G. Levy herself, who, despite everything, there's always going to be something elusive in anything that you come to truly love, and anything that you come to truly love as emanating from a creative spirit. There's always going to be something that, is just left off. I mean, because it cannot, hold the impression in your mind forever. And that's how that is. So there's a certain kind of element about that. But at the same time, I wanted to say a feeling of gratitude. Gratitude to the unknown instructors. You might remember the poem by Yeats. I believe the title is so beautiful. Gratitude to unknown instructors. Gratitude to unknown instructors. What they intended, they brought about. All things hang like a drop of dew upon a blade of grass. What they intended, they brought to pass. All things hang like a drop of dew upon a blade of grass. What they intended, they brought to pass. All things hang like a drop of dew upon a blade of grass. So it starts off with a compressed picture of almost like a human transcendence of time, or maybe a breaking through of the walls of time, or as I like to think of it, more like a molding and remolding of the walls of time, so that time, in a sense, becomes a shelter for the words as they are built in the poem. What they intended, they brought to pass. In other words, they created a vehicle through which the inner energy of the form could pass to us, even over the chasms of thousands of years. So the gratitude to the unknown instructors includes the Stone Age cave painters, deep in the bowels of Mother Earth, creating on the walls the figments and the fragments of something that has a parallel existence in the mundane world of time and space, and yet speaks of something that was hitherto unknown until it was put on the walls of a cavern deep within the earth. These are the unknown instructors that that we feel such gratitude to. And here's how it is, though. There is the work of art, and the vision of the work of art, and also, let me just say for a quick digression, the words, and the thoughts appear in the silence of the sound of the mind, in the silence of the sound of the mind, and that's what seems right about them. But then they appear in the world of form, in the world of time and space, in this fallen world of form, in this fallen world of time and space, and then everything is no longer up to us. It's like the word that is born in the sound of the silence of your mind and crosses the threshold of your lips and takes its form in some kind of work of your own hand, be it only a written line upon a page or a spoken sentence in the air, then it all goes to its own hotel and its own motel and its own hermitage and its own hovel, and it disappears and drifts away in the wind. It reminds me of the parable about the seed. Some seed falls into fertile earth, and some seed falls into rocky soil, and some seed is found by the birds of the air, and some seeds fructify and die and fall within the earth and bring forth new life. All these things are the form of seeds. That's one metaphorical way to look at them. Sometimes, though, when I read Rachel Levy, I am reminded of the kind of a thought seed springing out of the consciousness of the ever-living page in the mind when I see so clearly, not with my eyes though, when I see so clearly some insight into some structure, into some pattern, that speaks to the inner quality of our lives. For example, it is something like this. This is what she found for us. This is what she found for us. And let us also remember that the word troubadour has, it's a divining rod of a word in terms of its etymology. The word troubadour could mean trobar, it could mean to find, it could mean to put together, it could mean to draw from the air, as Uncle Ez put it, but to tropier, to invent, to find, to draw from the air. I don't know, is conjure from a different family of etymologies? Nevertheless, the ghost bridge is there. The ghost bridge is there to many other forms and ways that we can speak of this word troubadour. I would also note that the original troubadours of the 13th century, the ones by whom are called that name, occupied the same ground a little bit to the east and a little bit to the north of where the cave paintings were found. So who knows, right? The subterranean connections. The subterranean connections are there. Anyway, so the pattern and the structure of our lives. So the cave, all right? But the pathway, the footstep, the created work, the whirl in the grain of wood, the spangled branches of the tree of life, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of any tree before you in any place. The pattern then down which you walk, the road that you make in your life. This is what she brings us. This is what she found. That's the troubadour part. This is what R.G. Levy Troubadour has found for us. And it comes to us via her intuitive consciousness along where Mother Earth first spoke. Her material was in the New Hebrides and those islands out there in the ocean somewhere. In the New Hebrides, there is, you could say this about anything or any place. In the New Hebrides, there is the goddess. Ah, yes. She, the goddess. I must tell you her name. I don't want to mispronounce it. If you're going to mispronounce the name of any deity, if you mispronounce it, you'd best be sincere. And if you're sincere, but who knows? I mean, that's a risk all anthropologists take. But her name in the New Hebrides, and she can be fierce. Lahevhev. 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 Say the name of the goddess 3 times. That's okay. As Carl Jung wrote upon the walls of his hermitage, an old Gnostic saying, called or not, the God is always present. So it's okay. Lahevhev. Fierce, taking the form of the beast of life there, the tusked boar, that's one of her forms, and also the hawk. Lahevhev can be the hawk. Lahevhev can be the boar. Lahevhev can also be a twisted bit of nothingness. Lahevhev can be that bit of fear and doubt and dread found in the grinning net of chaos pulled in by Tiamat in the old Babylonian legends. Lahevhev can be that. Nevertheless, despite this, and is that not a triple form, by the way? A silent shout out to that bewildering and confusing book and rich and mystifying book, The White Goddess by Robert Graves, the triple goddess. This could be a form of that. And I wonder about the confluence of the intuitive anthropology that goes on sometimes in these things. The thing about those kind of connections is you got to be sure that they don't drive you crazy. But then again, make sure that there's a space in your mind where you can kind of lose the energy of the thought and find it appearing in another thought. Because it is a play of elemental thoughts that the poetic imagination casts its net toward. Anyway, Lahevhev, as the form of a hawk that you can see with your eyes. No, a hawk you create. A hawk you create with your imagination, your third eye, your mind, and the work of your hands, and the energies and warmth of your heart. The hawk carved upon the lodge poles of the huts and the lodges of the people there, and the momentary structures made over the sanctuary grounds of the underground spaces where religious ceremonies are performed. These are some of her forms. And then there is another god. I'll have to open up the book and get that god's name, but I will tell you that god, it's more important to pay attention to it's not more important to pay attention to the name of that god over any other god. See what polytheism does. It creates, these cycles of quickly moving ideas that blur and glimmer. I guess that's part of the beauty. But one constantly risks, as Lawrence Ferlinghetti said, one constantly risks absurdity, over the trapeze of all the possible meanings that appear and disappear as we go along. Nevertheless, along with Lahevhev, there is another deity, and this deity is the light of the sun. This deity lives as the light of the sun, though is not the sun itself, and lives in the moon, actually, and yet is not the moon. And this deity has no actual earthly location because it's not that kind of god. It's more like, you might say, oh, this one is worshipped in spirit and in truth, you might say. But here's the best part about that. First of all, this god's name, Taghar, Taghar, Taghar. You must utter it 3 times. A male deity. Even though Lahevhev is imaged as a hawk, here's who gets to be the hawk. The initiates of the orders of the priestly orders of that god, whose name I forgot, even though I said it 3 times. The name of that god. Maybe it's a god whose name is good to leave open. Sometimes God's names are that way, but I'll tell you this. This is the God that you don't embody by seeing. This is the God that in the movements of the ceremonies, you sort of like comport yourself to live as a form in space, responding to the invisible presence of this God. Oh, this is how dances are they not originally? The inner music and the way it moves through us and the way we externally embody it, which may have hardly any kind of like external resemblance to the way it's actually moving through our nervous systems. Instead, we offer it in the forms of the visible earth. So arms outstretched like a hawk, perhaps, or feet rooted to the ground like a tree, maybe, or something like a swaying in the wind, maybe, or something like that. This is the kind of ways that, this is the way she's talking about this. This is her vision coming to us one more time, appearing as this kenning, this pre-rational kind of stab in the dark. Not even a stab in the dark, that's too aggressive. This more like kind of like welcoming of what light is there out of the dark, so that light and darkness will blend into some kind of shape to suggest something that we could respond to in language that is somehow like shadow and light mixed and blended, making a momentary meaning. It could be like that. She offers us an image of the possibility where art and religion and the dance and observation, loving holistic observation of some external form, and then the inner meaning of it as it relates as a direct comment or teaching upon the life path of an entire people's. The only way to understand something like that is to understand it as a living poetic transmission in the ways that we are looking at it now, in the ways that we are recollecting it now and putting it together in our minds out of the scattered pieces of a restless imagination. Nevertheless, this is the life that we live. What form is the dance that is presided over and in honor of, to Levhaha and the other god whose name is its name, or his name, I guess. What other form does it take? It takes the structured rituals and dances and enactments, and like theatrical godly dramas are enacted in this world of these particular gods in the New Hebrides, and the dance steps create these labyrinth patterns. The dance steps create the labyrinthian patterns, and there are many, many kinds, and they all have their own kind of meaning, and they are all offerings of an image, an externalized image of the moving line of thought, expressed as lines traced upon the ground. Ooh, put that against our current technological exteriorization of consciousness, the computer or the television or any number of those things, and the ways, the feedback loop that is created, and the ways the meaning is felt and received and given. Compare that to the pathway traced by an individual moving through the complex forms, symbolic depictions of the passages of life and the stages of life under the watchful eyes of the gods and the goddesses, creating intricate patterns. Indeed, these are the steps of the intricate ones, and the pattern and the lines that they leave and make for us are practically words that we ourselves can read of the meaning of life. And here's how it works, folks. Here's how something like this is taken into this other dimension. Because here's what happens. Here's how it is. You go through your life and you become one who has learned and participated in the steps traced upon the ground. And along a cycle in time, you enact them on a regular basis. And their inner elements are revealed to you. They are sometimes in the form of characters. They are sometimes in the form of you as an individual. They are sometimes done, well, I believe that they're always done masked in one way or another, because for the most part, then, it is probably safer to describe it as being an objective order of spiritualized, an objectivized order of spiritual nature expressed in the form of the dance and the costumes and the persona and also the styles. There are comedies, there are tragicomedies, there are tragedies, there are odysseys, there are quests, there are prayers, there are fertility cycles, all of these things with their own kind of labyrinthian form, an intricate pattern sketched, traced in the sand. And you learn them, and you learn the elements within them so that your understanding is revised as the years go on. And then for the individual comes the time when the individual must die. And then the individual goes into the world we only know of by what we have heard about the gods. We hear the talk about the gods. It goes way, way back. And the only thing that really you start off with is not that they exist or not. That's a distraction. No, it's more like this is what came to us in answer to a question that only we could ask. And it is shown to us in a particular way, in the way of the myth. And it is for that reason that Plato, in all of his philosophical expressions, where he worked to make the dialogue and the persona of Socrates and all of the different kind of thoughts and ideas, sometimes emphasizing the primacy of reason to the exclusion of all other things. And yet in the midst of all this, many, many times, there's all different kinds of myths. Sometimes they're almost direct retellings of the Greek myths Plato puts in there. Sometimes they're adaptations of certain of the things that the gods do so that he can, make a certain point. And sometimes it's for like the most crudest didactic purposes, which is what? To win friends and influence people. Sometimes myth is used in that way, but then there's also a way where the analogy and the metaphor and the image and the myth, as sometimes it would be related by Socrates when he said, the people around here say a certain thing, or maybe Socrates would say, it is said that, he would go off into a tale. And his amanuensis, Plato wrote it down, and then it becomes a part of our heritage and a part of that philosophy, and a paradoxical one. For how can what is often interpreted to be, the paragon of the original reason, the reasoning mind, how can it be anything but something in denial of myth, in denial of fantasy or of imagination? And yet again and again, It's just there. It's part of the whole of the expression. So what could it mean? Well, you could be frustrated by that in different ways. I would just say that there are certain forms of expression that certain elements of the imaginative, moral element of the mind only comes into play when it is moved by things like that. So it moves in that way, and then a certain dimension of your own consciousness moves in that way, so that suddenly you see, this is a meaning to interpret. I can tell that this interpretation strikes home because something in me moves in response to that. Some inner unity is kind of felt or something. And so it's a part of the expression, is what it is. Well, let's continue though. This is the building of a way to understand the pages of the book of the psyche. So if you imagine everything that I'm saying or trying to say now and think of it as a book, you can turn the pages and you can kind of go back to stuff and ponder it in a certain way and kind of respond in that way. Even the energy of the pages turning will impart a certain kind of momentum, which has different ways of working. But that's maybe a little bit hyperbolic. But nevertheless, it becomes a further form in space, in duration, and in space, in extension, and in time, in duration. A form in this fallen world of forms, just like in the New Hebrides, one who has studied the ancient dances, participated in the ancient dances, become all the persona that you can become in the ancient dances. And then, because human life on this earth in this form is finite, that person dies. Then it is a different dimension that they are in. There is a continuation in different forms down through time with different trials, different adventures, different tests. What happens in the New Hebrides, according to the findings and the interpretations and the poetic projections, the imaginative conceptions of R.G. Levy, is once the person's died, they go to the threshold of a cave. There it is, the threshold of a cave. They are between the worlds. But the elements that they've studied and appreciated and sometimes seen all their lives, in their ceremonial, expressive lives, is still before them. So it is said that you come to the threshold of the cave, and the ground is sandy, and there is a pattern upon the ground. It's a labyrinth. An elaborate labyrinth is a pattern drawn upon the ground. Who traced it? Lahevhev traced it. But who reaches out and scrubs out half of it? The guardian ghost. Yes, between the worlds you come to the threshold of the cave, and there is the labyrinth of the pattern traced upon the ground by the goddess Lahevhev, and then suddenly the foot of the fearsome guardian ghost reaches out and erases half of it. And then what must you do? You must walk toward that labyrinth, step toward that labyrinth, and then trace out the erased element or the erased shape in the labyrinth. You trace it out of your own memory of the dances and the footsteps and the personas that you inhabited in your life in the other world, which you are now no longer in. But out of your memory of that world, you trace that pattern and complete that design. And then the guardian ghost beckons you into the cave, where you meet with Lahevhev, and maybe you're reunited with all your friends and all your relatives. If, on the other hand, you forget the pattern or make a mistake, well then, the guardian ghost eats that day, if you know what I mean. So, inside the cave, before Lahevhev, who knows in what form she is, but there arises the fumes of the sacrifice, the sacrificed wild boar, sacrificed in the name of the goddess. And before Lehev, some kind of transaction occurs, or perhaps some kind of like testimony or offering occurs, or maybe it's simply the testimony of the completion of the pattern that you made out of your dedicated memory and your skillful tracings. Maybe that is what persuades Lehev to take the boar as an offering rather than you, and then you can go and be with your friends in the afterlife, or however they conceive of it. It can be like that. But Rachel Gertrude Levy has to say one more thing about that. Because after conjuring this world of meaning, in these very, very bare terms in our mind, there's another, one more element, one more further penetration into the cave, so to speak, that she offers to us. And that is for some of the initiates into the higher mysteries of these dances, the story doesn't end there necessarily, even after you've been granted passage by Lehev. No, you are granted passage, but you end up, or you begin, on the shore of a vast and unknown sea. But not without help. You have in your hand a cane. It's just there. The cane is in your hands. You have gnawed upon the bark of a milk-giving tree. You have gnawed upon the bark of a milk-giving tree. You have a special cane or walking stick in your hand. And you build a beacon on the shore. And you build a beacon on the shore, and from across the dark waters comes the guide. And in the ferry boat of the guide, across the dark waters you go. Perhaps, the night sea journey. And you come to the source of fire itself. A volcano, a mountain of fire, or a mountain with a fire within it. And, it must be strange up on the slopes of that volcano. It must be a peculiar kind of heaven. For there, amidst the flames, the skeletons dance. This is the heaven where amidst the flames the skeletons dance. And I do not know if the initiatees into the mysteries join the skeletons in their dance, who, by the way, at certain cycles, they take their skulls off and lay them on the ground, and then the pile of bones lays down on the ground, and then they sleep and rest for a while. And then when the time to dance comes again, the bones come together and the skeletons dance on. Oh, what a heaven it must be, This is the imaginative projection, the mythical conception from the intuitive pages of R.G. Levy, offered to you now in this form. And here comes the part where I have to say, even though this is digital, essentially the expressive meaning is still the word. So consider yourself reading right now, as I would say, in a certain sense of the word. And all that means is reading in this sense. Reading in a spoken setting simply means being present to the meanings as they begin to become composed in the mind. Because how I see it is there's a composure hoped for from my side, but then there's also a composition that is composed, as a mutual thing between us and the culture and the cosmos all the time. It has to be that way because I am drawing on it now to be doing what I'm doing, you see. So it's not like this is anything but proof of that. But it takes its form in the way that it takes its form, right? And so, it's either that or, sounds in the air, but it's that too, and that's also good. All right, now here's where I want to say though, what is involved in this? It's a transmission of the designs of form through all these different imagistic manifestations. And so the book gives us leave to speak of artistic creation and religious expression as being virtually one and the same. And we go from there, though. This is what I yearn for as an inner assurance. And this is what I find when I interpret the book to myself in this way, this and other books. To me, it must be that the poetic imagination and the mind of compassion, they are virtually one and the same in this form of the movement of inspiration, in this imaginative conception that I'm trying to sketch out or limn out, in this sense of like how a poem can take its meaning, or how a story can be told, or how the history of images and the places from which they are gathered can become and blend not only with the history of the world, but also with the history of the thoughts between us. For we, in our own imaginative conceptions expressed and received, are replicating a joining together of the inner structure of the healing forms that are there in the passages of time, which are simply the materials of the creative element in cultures and in human imaginative creations, be they communal or individual. Ways to understand that and to track it and to see it and to discern it and to, yes, even make it up a little as it goes along, because that too is how we contribute to it. And so this is how that is. But now I want to say a little bit more. It relates to the pattern of a life. And it relates to us individually, in a sense, all in these different ways. A word here that I want to try to reach into in acknowledgement of a friend, an acknowledgement and honoring of a friend in community with certain pre-shadings, the very things that continue to come to fruition now, like a tree does. This friend, who was an artist in wood, though at the time of some of these conversations, when we were roommates, we would find ourselves consistently, spontaneous metaphors would arise that we would kind of like pass back and forth in our conversations to each other. And it's kind of funny, speaking of whorls in wood, trees of the knowledge of good and evil, and trees of life, and the labyrinths in the branches, in the whispering of the leaves, and in the making of the things, the utilitarian things that we make from the tree. We would sometimes speak in terms of wood and the changes of wood, the ways it can warp, the ways that it seasons. And I believe that he really liked my explanation to him of how the Japanese word for song is also the same as the word for a whorl in wood, or a whorl in wood grain, from where the branch of the tree grows. In other words, the grain curves and flows and does some turns around itself and then continues on its way, but that track is there as a sign for you to read with your intuitive reading eye, as a sign in nature for you to understand the nature of songs. And I have to say also, though, that original metaphor comes from Gary Snyder, probably in Earth Household. I cannot, I want that known, so that, because I'm going to have to go and think about what I've drawn from that sentence or that paragraph back when I read it so long ago and shared it with this friend back at that time. And he really liked it. But what is clearer to me now as time goes on, the whole time in his mind, he was thinking of something in wood that he was actually going to create. So for me, what was poetic metaphor and a way to kind of join in together connected ideas so that maybe I could remember them or kind of like come to a deeper understanding of them, for him was Lord knows how many stratagems and possibilities and ideas. And so eventually, he becomes an artist in wood years later. But and so I'm struck by the ways that He could bring to fruition things that in me remained in words. So it's taken me this long, though, of course, to be able to honor my own medium and to relate that to you, because that's how we will come to know him. That's how we will come to know this friend. Because this friend, too, with so many things that he did, not just in the carving of the wood or the intuitive comradeship of conversation and the just the freshness of the receptivity in the ways to respond to these ideas. Each of these little things, and you could sit here and stand here and think of one after the other, it would probably never end. Each of them ways this individual expresses a vision of life. So this is something that we can learn to become more appreciative of as we continue, being, beings in our moral imagination. So for that leads me to this poem I want to read, and then I'll probably have to check the time for just a moment. But this poem I wrote is called A Winter Stew of Beets, Beef Brisket, and Root Vegetables. A winter stew of beets, beef brisket, and root vegetables. The fantasy of our sensation of hot and cold, as we slide in and out of our planetary school days, is there for one and all, smooth and hidden, roughed up and obvious like some medallion for the best crocus at the state fair, or honorable mention in a hamburger eating contest. The didacticism comes from the movement of the image in the dimensions of the soul's moral imagination, and from its own circle, from its own circling side, inside or out, spiraling or squiggled. It is simply a question of quickened interest. You can blow out the candle and become characters in each other's ghost story, no fuss. Or you can illuminate via inner glow and disappear into that, playfully, perfectly hidden. Either move will illustrate something to someone. So you see, that's my own words to try to come across to you with this idea that there is the moral imagination. I want to say, yes, I said I was going to check my watch. That intention I bring to pass. Okay, good. The time is there. That dimension, is there, in order to help us to bring something to pass. But there is, yes, the moral imagination. So about R.G. Levy, this is, I think, I just want to see if there's some creative or playful way that I can impart this to you. Because to me, in a notion of genre, it's easy for me, and maybe I will from now on, think of this book as a prose poem. I might just do that, because that's how I'm treating it right now, and it certainly is. And of course, there's a whole, extravagant kind of ways that one could go about in a Rococo way to explain that, but I don't necessarily want to go there with that. Instead, I want to look at it like it's a genre. It's a new kind of genre kind of thing. It is kind of like, I don't know. It's like a transmutational kind of tracing, expostulation of symbols or images. I don't know. Originally it was something else as it was coming out of the gates of my mouth. But you know how these things go. They go. Sometimes they come back. But who really knows about that? No, instead, it's her vision, and this is what I want to say, and it did come back. Because that's a part of nature. It's a part of the cycle, the pattern of existence. The way these ideas are, they are recollected. Yes, it comes from the pool of memory. And it is a real place, dimensionless or not, but the pool of memory. For Rachel Gertrude Levy is a Platonist. She is a Platonist. And how fine to feel that fellowship. A creative Platonist. Why in this case? So simple. I can hardly explain it. So simple because it's a basic understanding of the way the image moves. I don't know. I guess I started off by trying to mention the moral imagination and the way the moral imagination is moved. I want to go from there to this notion of one's response to what moves one as an expression of the original moral imagination. And so for Plato, it is the sun. But the sun is only visible. The sun is only a visible manifestation of an interior reality, which is the good. For like the sun, the good provides us with light by which we can see. Like the sun, the good provides the nourishing, germinating energy of the seed in the ground, which is such a unifying metaphor for any creative idea, to speak of it as a seed in the ground. And like a seed in the ground, goodness, like the sun, nourishes it and brings it forth. And so it is the sun that is, with our earthly eye, we can conceive for our imaginative eye, or perhaps our imaginative eye is what conceives the sun as its external manifestation. It could be something like that. But to bring in the cave for just a little bit, and her writings in the tradition of Platonism, Plato, as a genre, because too, it also, Plato's dialogues are constructed so as works of art. It is almost as if I wonder, and I wonder if it's really saying all that much, but to think that maybe 7,000 years from now, Plato's dialogues will be considered prose poems, and the figure of Socrates will be a fountain of all these different kinds of genres, these genres of expression. I think it could be something like that. And as I am assured and inspired by the mind of Rachel Gertrude Levy, I am sure that it is a possibility that is pretty simple to conceive of. But anyway, so we have to have that in our minds in order to understand one more visit to the cave. We have to go into the cave one more time in order to witness the conception of the way it is with us in our consciousness. So from Plato, it's the cave. And inside the cave, it's a sloping, gravelly, harsh kind of slope. And then it goes down, flattens out a little bit, and then there's a wall. It is the cave wall. And there are people there. But they are constrained. Their faces and their necks and their heads are constrained so that they can only see the wall before them. And it's always been this way with them. And behind the people, there is a fire. And it crackles and glows like fires do. And over near to it, there is a road. But it's not the road so much that's our concern here. It's that wall by the road, because behind that wall there crouch other people, and they're the puppeteers, and they have artifacts and devices and shapes and outlines and silhouettes, and they project by the fire's light upon the cave wall on the opposite all these changing images and sights, which the people who are constrained in viewing only that and have viewed only that since the very beginning of their own consciousness, that's all they see. And not only are there the images of the shadows on the wall, but I believe there are sound effects. Only they think it's coming from just this one thing that they see before them. And they are the denizens inside of the cave. Imagine then for them, as Plato offers it to us in this transforming kind of poetic metaphor, that we can kind of interpret and play with, an usher. The usher comes in and begins to go to work. Or, a benevolent agent comes in, begins to go to work, undoes the chains and the fastenings and the constraints, and takes one individual, and gently helps that individual up, who probably is ever so stiff because he's never moved any other way before, and is brought up a harsh, steep slope. I mean, imagine being always constrained in one position, and now you're going up a harsh slope. It must be strange to move, and then is dragged toward this awful, dazzling thing. It is the fire. It dazzles the eyes. Imagine if your eyes are only used to darkness and suddenly there's this bright, dazzling fire. It's got to be unpleasant, especially if you don't know what it is. And then there's a voice saying to you, "Behold the source of the figments that you have seen." And then, so not only is the dazzling brightness of it all affecting you, but it's the strangeness of the instructions that are being told to you as an interpretation of what you're seeing. Would you or would you not believe that? It would be almost too much. But then imagine yourself dragged up the upslope of that hill again, and then dragged out into the far more dazzling light of day. Oh, can you imagine how shocking that would be? Especially if you come anywhere near actually seeing the actual sun, which is the visible manifestation of goodness, which is the source of the energy of this entire conception of consciousness. Imagine how unpleasant it would be. Oh, but you would get used to it in a good way, in an educative way. Didactically, you would become used to seeing in this new way, and what you saw in this new way. But imagine how strange it would be, how wondrous it would be. You would have to learn gradually, of course. You would probably have to read the reflections in rain puddles, looking down, in order to get used to what you see when you look up. You have to start with baby food and learn to chew and digest before you advance on to, steaks and mushrooms and vegetables and garlic and pickles, right? And so it would be like that. And you would gradually learn to accustom your eyes, when to look and when not to look, and what it means in the way that you perceive, and all of this. This is the journey toward truth, as Plato gives it to us in this poetic image of the metaphor of the cave. But let's look at its social realist side also. Imagine the ones still down there. What would it be like to go back in there? Wouldn't the darkness, so familiar before, be suddenly strange to you? And imagine, what could you communicate to them? "Oh, I have been to another world. It is more real than this one. I can tell you everything." Would they even understand? It would be strange to them. There's a dazzling light. Well, you would have to show them yourself. They would have to go on that journey themselves in order to understand that. And this is the path that is traced, and as a metaphorical image, this path of individuation, this path of learning and growth in consciousness and spirit, and the soul that Rachel Gertrude Levy offers us through her book, this way of understanding that we can kind of draw out and kind of tease out. So that's a little bit of that journey into that. I also wanted to mention this friend of mine. I'm going to read one more poem to this friend of mine in honor of it. Everything that I'm saying now can be traced back to him in some sense. And it was there in both of us long before. We were roommates at a time when we were both going through the same kind of initiatory doorway. And it was the best of times and the worst of times, which is how, friendships are forged. And I want to add, if I can do it quickly, in a Platonic myth, it was Hermes in cooperation, under the guidance, really, of Zeus, who brought to human beings, according to Plato, the gifts of justice in the consciousness and friendship in the consciousness. Yes, it was Epimetheus who gave to human beings so precious little. It was Epimetheus who gave to, the animals their claws and their thick skins and their, all their strengths and endurances. And by the time he handed out all these animal qualities, there was very little left for the humans. And so his brother Prometheus had to come and compensate for that by stealing from Hephaestus and Athena techne, the technical skills, in a way that you interact with the atmosphere and the substances in such a way to benefit your physical existence. Prometheus is the one who enabled human beings to conceive out of nothing a way to live and survive in the world. And yet, it wasn't enough. How could it be? Because when they gathered together, there was conflict. They fought, and they were brutal, and they were awful because they behaved as animals did. So it was Hermes, the messenger, who brought to people the gifts of the god, of friendship and justice, and all these notions that become our common inheritance from our culture. But they had to adjust it because it's a learning process. It was such that Hermes said to Zeus, and I quote, Zeus, pop. No, I'm sure that they would be, well, Hermes can get away with a lot of informality, so who knows? But Hermes, I gave these people friendship and justice, but now let's think about this now, Zeus, because I'm also the god of education, of intuitive education, and what I've got to tell you is this justice and this friendship. Is it like carpentry or the skill in woodworking? I don't think so, right? And Zeus said, no, it is not like that. Is it like doctoring or fortune telling or lion taming? Is it anything like that? No, it's not like that. So then, Father Zeus, it's not that I would give this gift of friendship and justice in certain amounts more to some than others, so that those who have that gift in a larger amount can be a support to those who have that gift in the less amount. Is it like that? No, said Zeus. It's got to be something that is common to all. Because in the life of the city and in the life of the people gathering together, obviously Zeus has come a long way from the arbitrary thunderbolts in this particular myth, right? But it's Zeus who says, I think this is a gift that must be given to all in equal measure. Now, it's not going to be available to some as it is to others, and the ways that they're going to understand it are going to be as different as there are people. But nevertheless, these things, O Hermes, my son, you give them all equally to all the people, because it is what they need and part of what they are that makes them human beings. And so Hermes did that. So that's how we got the gift of friendship, via Hermes. And so this is a Hermetic explanation of friendship on behalf of, in honor of, a friend of mine who's an artist to the soul. And so this is this poem. I will read it. I wrote it on March 15th, on the Ides of March. I've got to turn the pages in this journal to get to that date, and then I will tell you it's about my Aristotelian friend. And it goes like this. Its title is actually A Humble Man of Mystery. Twists and turns in conversational flow. Transparent to each other we could be, so that images of concept touched upon and lit up our mutual unconscious value systems we were involved in formulating communally into an aesthetic we could both work toward as a shared ideal. So that today there are these unknown birds above me in the blue sky, headed north. It is the Ides of March, for it was when I wrote this. It is the Ides of March, and I do not know these birds, white with their black wings, all 7 of them. And now, as they are so far off, the slanting sunlight makes their whiteness flash. They bring me news of his Aristotelian mystery. So this is what I have to say, this friend, tracing out a labyrinth. And I assure you, it will be creatively done, if it hasn't already. And of course, these things are contemporaneous. But so, how the Plato thing works into all this is, there are the energies, as I'm still learning to understand it. My own personality is like this. I'm trying to understand how the different forms are communicating themselves to my consciousness, even as my own inner workings go on in the same way. So, outside in were some of these metaphors that we spoke of, in the way that I was conceiving of them. It was like I wanted, through the cracks between the phrases that were, tumbling out of, the mind, I wanted to see farther into like this inner part of it, so as to be able to see inside, from inside the word looking out, from inside the thought looking out, because that is how you make poetry. That's one way, one quest, one little, barricade of heaven to try to leap over, or of hell, if you wish. Whereas for him, so I call it an Aristotelian mystery. And so here's a quote from Aristotle, or a paraphrase. Aristotle said, "The lover of myths, composed of wonders, is simultaneously a lover of wisdom, for myths are composed of wonders, and wonders are the beginnings, then and now, of philosophy." So the lover of myths, composed of wonders, is also a lover of wisdom. For myths are composed of wonders, and wonders are the beginning of philosophy. So it's like this is part of the labyrinth. Oh, maybe this is good to learn as a succession of ideas. But Aristotle said this. And so the whole time I'm talking to this friend of mine about the seasoning and the wood and everything, years later, he holds in his hand a bowl composed of the burl of a branch of wood that he has turned and learned. And so I see before my eyes, my physical eye, the manifested thing in physical reality of this living thing that had its birth as what was before just a dim motion in my mind, a mythical conception. But, what is the world of time and space and of substance but the fruition of a particular mythic vision, which, comes to us, is offered to us by such gifted individuals as my friend and Rachel Gertrude Levy. So that's what this talk is about, the Gate of Horn. So much more to say, but for now it's time to thank you for your heroic listening. And may we all continue on our unique way, joyfully nourished by the imaginative nourishment that is there for us, that we can attune ourselves to as we go along our studious ways. Anyway, that's the message. And thank you for your heroic listening. So long for now.